My son had told me he was going to the cemetery to visit his father. Something in me stirred, and I decided to follow him quietly, carrying a few flowers to lay at the grave. But as I arrived, Ephraim, the longtime groundskeeper, stepped toward me, his eyes serious, almost icy. "Don't go to that grave," he whispered. "You need to see what he's really doing." The apartment still carried the weight of my late husband's presence. Dust danced in the morning sunlight, settling slowly on the bookshelves and furniture that had been untouched for years. It had been 5 years since he passed, yet everything in the apartment, the massive mahogany desk, the armchair shaped by his body, even the small geranium pots on my corner desk, breathed him. Today was the anniversary of his death, and I felt the familiar heaviness pressing on me like molasses. I poured myself a cup of tea, the warmth barely reaching the cold that radiated from deep inside. I was waiting for my son, Jabari, and his wife, Niara. Every year they came on this day, not out of grief, but for opportunity. They arrived as expected, Jabari bursting into the hallway with forced cheerfulness, the sharp scent of expensive cologne trailing behind him, and Niara following like a shadow, her sorrow carefully manufactured. She glanced at the bookshelves with mild disinterest. She had never cared for these books, only seeing them as dusty collections. I offered them tea, and they launched into their rehearsed complaints, shipping delays, debt piling up, urgent pleas for financial help. Their words dripped with calculation, the kind only practiced predators wield over the unsuspecting. I had long since burned away any pity. 5 years of experience had reduced the motherly warmth I might have once felt into cold, bitter ash. I studied my son's face, etched with frustration and discontent, and I hardly recognized the boy I had once kissed on scraped knees. "I'll think about it, Jabari," I said quietly. "I need to check what I have." Then he moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back, mimicking the posture his father once held. But it was empty, hollow. A single tear rolled down his cheek as he murmured about needing to sit at the cemetery alone, to talk to his father. Niara watched, eyes glittering with subtle admiration. For a fleeting moment, my heart softened. Could there really still be something human left in him? Could the memory of his father stir genuine emotion beneath the years of selfishness? Compelled by curiosity and a desperate hope to witness truth, I quickly changed, took 3 deep red carnations I had bought that morning, and called a cab to a nearby street to avoid being noticed. At Pinnage Cemetery, the air was cool, filled with the scent of decaying leaves and quiet anticipation. My heart raced as I followed Ephraim along a barely visible path. He didn't speak. We walked in silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves underfoot and the distant cry of a crow. He led me to a small hill overlooking the family crypt. The black granite mausoleum rose solemn and majestic in the distance, a silent testament to the Johnson family legacy. "You can see everything from here," Ephraim said softly, stepping aside. "They cannot see us." I gripped the cold metal of the old fence and waited, tense with anticipation. Within minutes, 2 figures appeared along the main avenue, Jabari and Niara. My son was not alone. He hadn't come seeking solace or paying respects. This was a performance. They carried no flowers, no pause, no moment of silence. Jabari retrieved a set of large antique keys from his pocket and prepared to unlock the crypt. The heavy rusted iron door groaned as Jabari turned the large antique key, the sound echoing through the cemetery like a grim warning. They stepped inside, but it was not a tomb they entered. It looked more like a mundane storage space, cold and lifeless. My chest tightened, The premonition that had been quietly simmering since I arrived now solidified into something unbearable. I could barely breathe as I watched, frozen, my eyes glued to the scene. Minutes later, a third figure appeared, a man in a long dark coat, his face obscured in shadow, yet his presence radiated menace. He didn't speak more than a few words, but I could sense the slick, dangerous intent in every movement. Jabari and Niara emerged from the crypt, carrying carefully wrapped objects in dark velvet. One was elongated, the other almost square. They handed them to the stranger quickly, glancing around nervously, their actions betraying secrecy and urgency. The wind carried fragments of their whispered conversation. "Flawless forgery," the man said, lifting the velvet slightly. "A pro couldn't spot it." Pride laced my son's voice as he replied, "I told you the master wouldn't let us down." Nara's sharp, greedy tone cut through the silence. "The museum. Everything is smooth with the Atlanta Museum of Art." Jabari chuckled darkly. "The director will swallow it whole. The key is your people get the documents to prove it's a found treasure." In that instant, everything inside me changed. The maternal warmth I had nurtured for 40 years, love that had forgiven lies, covered debts, and believed in tears of repentance, vanished like a flash of lightning, leaving only a block of cold, crystalline clarity. This wasn't hatred. It was something heavier, denser, forged from disappointment and decades of foolish indulgence. They weren't just criminals. They were desecrators. My son had turned his father's crypt into a staging ground for trafficking fakes, betraying the very legacy his father had spent a lifetime protecting. The man in the coat nodded, took the bundles, and vanished. Jabari and Nara locked the crypt behind them, leaving without laying a single flower. I didn't speak to Ephraim, only nodded silently, grateful that he said nothing. Walking through the cemetery, past solemn crosses and weathered obelisks, I felt like I was encased in a soundless frozen bubble. Back in the apartment, the familiar smell of books, old paper, and tobacco greeted me. The living room, once a living memorial, now felt like a set piece, beautiful yet hollow. I moved to my little writing corner, the dusty desk by the window, and carefully opened the bottom drawer I hadn't touched in decades. Inside lay my old tools, a jeweler's loupe, a compact ultraviolet lamp, fine tweezers and scalpels, and beneath them, 3 personal reference volumes on historical pigments, watermarks, and bookbinding techniques. For 30 years these tools had been idle, my passion dormant under the weight of widowhood and motherhood. I lifted the jeweler's loupe to my eye. Every line, every pore came into sharp focus. I didn't feel anger or plan revenge. I simply allowed the cold, crystalline clarity to fill me, pushing out everything else, emptying the vessel to prepare it for something new. The next morning I began to restore my corner. I wiped away decades of dust, repotted my geraniums, cleaned my old publications, and saw my name, Eva Jones, on the covers as though greeting an old, long-lost self. By noon, Jabari and Nara returned. This time there was no false sorrow in their eyes, only impatience and greed. They demanded their answer, but I remained calm, precise, and deliberate, moving through the motions of pouring tea with a patience that unnerved them. Their confidence, their certainty of my weakness, was a weapon I now held in my hands, silent and immeasurably powerful. Their words no longer pierced me. I felt something inside finally calibrating, adjusting, like the optics in a finely tuned instrument. I placed my cup back on the saucer, the soft clink echoing loudly in the strained silence. "All right," I said, my voice steady, almost weary. "I understand you." Relief flickered across their faces. Jabari leaned back, Niara allowed herself a short, triumphant smile. "I will need to review my assets," I added. Jabari immediately straightened. "Of course. See what's in the accounts. Call the bank if you need to. We can wait an hour." "No," I said simply. "I need time. I'll do it alone." I stood, signaling the conversation was over. They left, tossing instructions over their shoulders about which bank, which account, how best to make the transfer, confident of the outcome. I watched them go, nodding silently. Once the door closed, I returned not to the phone but to my shining writing desk. Their words, what could you possibly know? Hung in the air like a challenge. They had underestimated me. They had forgotten who I was, and I was only beginning to remember. I did not wait until evening. I found an old number in a dusty address book, the direct line to Pine Ridge Cemetery. The rings seemed endless. "Hello," Ephraim's low voice answered. "Ephraim, this is Eva Jones," I said, calm and businesslike, the voice of the woman I had been before, decades of widowhood and motherhood. "I need to get into the crypt tonight. Can you help me?" A pause, brief, thoughtful. "Yes," he said finally. "What time?" "When the gates are closed. No one will be here." "Good. By the side gate. 3 hours from now." He hung up. The first step was taken. Night fell swiftly over the city. Dressed entirely in black, I took only my toolbox wrapped in a shawl and a small, powerful flashlight. By the side gate, Ephraim awaited, a shadow merging with the brick wall. He silently unlocked the gate, ushered me in, and re-locked it behind us. We walked the empty paths. I felt no fear, only belonging. Here among the dead, I felt more alive than in years spent in my museum of an apartment. At the Johnson crypt, massive and foreign in the moonlight, Ephraim produced his keys, the proper set, not the ones Jabari had. He didn't rush. His face, half in shadow, bore a deep, long-standing respect. "Miss Jones," he said softly, "your husband, Wami Johnson. He was more than a man to me. He saved my family. Everything I have is thanks to him." He produced a small, worn notebook. "I've been watching your son for 6 months," Ephraim continued. "I saw what he did to your husband's grave. I took notes. Everything is here. Dates, times, license plates, conversations. I did it for him. For memory." I gripped it tightly, its weight heavy with betrayal. The crypt door groaned as Ephraim inserted the key. Dust, cold, and centuries-old air poured out. "The spot is here," he said, pointing to a marble slab. "Press here and here near the bottom. It will move. Lock yourself inside. I'll be nearby. When you're done, open the door. I'll hear it." Then he melted into the shadows. Inside, flashlight beams slicing through darkness. I found the hidden niche. Velvet-wrapped objects lay inside. I unwrapped the largest. An old icon, the savior not made by hands. The eyes bore sorrow and forgiveness. The varnish was darkened with age. The crackle of time perfect. I opened my toolbox. Tools instinctively found their places in my hands. 30 years of disuse vanished. Every millimeter, every brushstroke, every chip and crack I examined. The UV lamp revealed a tiny foreign fluorescence. Titanium dioxide, a chemical impossible in the 15th century. A masterful forgery. But one arrogant mistake. Anatol Voronov, the expelled restorer. Brilliant, unethical, obsessed. I now knew what I had to do. Carefully, I replaced the icon, folded the tools, locked the compartment. Silent, methodical, as though I had never been there. Ephraim waited, key in hand. We left without a word. Back in the apartment, I brewed coffee. Sunlight touched my window. Yesterday was over. Today, action began. I found the number I needed. Paul K. Stevens, director of the Atlanta Museum of Art. Fingers steady, I called. The polite pretense fell instantly. My knowledge, my authority, my certainty silenced him. I named the forgery, named Voronov, and struck at the center of their web. I hung up. Silence returned, but it hummed now with tension. In that museum office, orders were being given, phones ringing frantically, contracts, nearly signed, tossed aside. Jabari and Niara would soon learn the truth. Their easy money, gone. Their web unraveling. And I would wait, serene, for the storm I had begun. 2 days passed. Silence, deafening, tense. They hadn't called. I knew. This was the calm before the storm. And old paper. It smelled of coffee, ink and possibility. I moved through the apartment like someone rediscovering a city they once thought lost. Each book I opened, each document I handled reminded me that knowledge, like time, could be reclaimed. Days passed, but they were no longer measured by worry or mourning. They were measured by the meticulous work of authenticity and scholarship. Ephraim visited often, always silently, always steady, a living testament to loyalty and gratitude. He never spoke unless necessary, and when he did, his words were precise, unembellished. I resumed correspondence with museums, collectors, and fellow experts. Each letter, each call, was a reclaiming of authority, a proof that Eva Jones, the woman buried under grief and time, was alive, observant, and unstoppable. Requests for evaluations, assessments, and provenance verification poured in. My days were full, purposeful, and rigorous, and as I worked, a quiet satisfaction settled over me. I had not only restored my own life, but safeguarded the legacies of those who had been silenced by greed and ignorance. The past had been honored, and the present, my present, was now entirely my own. At night, I often sat by the window, looking out over the city. The lights reflected on the streets like scattered jewels. I felt the weight of the past lift slightly each day. There was still vigilance, still the need for care. But there was also freedom. And in that freedom, I finally recognized that life, like art, could be revived. Stroke by careful stroke, decision by deliberate choice. The apartment no longer whispered of loss. It sang of renewal. And I, Eva Johnson Jones, archivist, widow, mother, and survivor, finally felt the world open before me, bright, vast, and full of the work I was born to do. The apartment no longer smelled of decay, lemon polish, freshly brewed coffee, and the printer's ink of new catalogues filled the air. I sat at my desk, examining a photograph of an enameled locket through my loop. The phone rang sharply. Without looking up, I picked it up. Jones! Hello, Miss Jones. This is the Legacy Auction House. We're calling about that Fabra cigarette case. The paperwork confirms provenance. Solid documents. I chuckled softly. Paperwork is the easiest thing to fake, I replied. Is the master's hallmark authentic? Perfect. Too perfect, I said, pushing the photograph aside. Carl Faber's apprentice always set the hallmark slightly tilted by fractions of a millimeter. Yours? Ruler straight. Modern work. Done using old sketches. No, the provenance is fake. Tell your client that. A stunned silence greeted my words. I hung up, returning to my loop. Twice a week, I led seminars at the Museum for Young Curators and Art History students. In the bright hall, they hung on my every word, seeing not an old widow, but a source of knowledge, a spark of authenticity ignited in them. Never trust first impressions, I told them, holding an ancient reliquary. Beauty can lie, history can lie, science can lie, but the object itself never lies. You just have to listen. Later, I didn't go home immediately. Sunlight was warm, and I bought a bouquet of white lilies, driving to Pine Ridge Cemetery. The granite door of our crypt was closed forever. I placed the flowers, tracing the engraved letters, Quam Johnson. No sharp grief pierced me now, only quiet sadness and gratitude. "Everything is right now," I whispered. "Everything is in its place." Ephraim appeared at a distance, sweeping the driveway. Our eyes met. A single nod, a silent salute between two custodians. I walked away, sun on my back. I was no longer a shadow of my husband. I was Eva Jones, free. Later, a call came from the Legacy auction house about a Fabra cigarette case. I inspected every detail, and again, truth emerged. Fakes could never outsmart expertise. In time, the museum recognized my mastery. At a press conference, I spoke to journalists about art, authenticity, and the quiet truth objects hold. Ephraim's notebook displayed evidence that prevented a major theft. Meanwhile, those who betrayed me were apprehended, their schemes unraveled, my home transformed too. The dusty drapes came down, light filled every corner, my books, my workspace, my writing desk. Everything reflected life, not mourning. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Eva Jones's story is one of betrayal, but also of immense inner strength. She reclaimed her name, dignity, and future. She chose justice over blind sentiment, wisdom over emotion, and proved it's never too late to remember who you truly are.